Coburn talks politics.
It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Stuck to a plan, we've taken the action, wasn't always easy, but we've got there and inflation is back to target and that means people will start to feel the benefits.
Inflation is now down to where it was 3 years ago, but that doesn't mean that for many people life suddenly got easier.
Inflation hits the 2% target, but will the Tories get any credit? The billionaire John Caldwell abandons the Tories, saying he'll vote Labour for the first time.
All the criticisms that I made of Rishi during his chancellorship, I think were pretty much evidenced in the D-Day situation, where a complete lack of judgment.
The SNP has just launched its manifesto with a focus on the NHS.
The SNP message on the health service is clear. It is simple and it will never change. The NHS is not for sale.
And as politicians hoofit around the country looking for your vote, I'm at a cattle market finding out what farmers in Selby make of all the election chat.
Joining us today, Schools Minister Damien Hines, Shadow Cabinet Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, Ray Newton-Smith, and comedian and writer Jeff Norcott. This is Politics Live Election 2024. Let's start with the rate of inflation and this headline. BBC News, inflation falls to lowest level in almost 3 years. Yes, at 7 o'clock this morning, the Bank of England announced that the rate of inflation had hit the 2% target. Rain, the rate of inflation has dropped. Prices are still rising, but more slowly. Does that mean the cost of living crisis is over?
I don't think it's over, but it's obviously good news for our economy that inflation is back at 2%, which is our long-term target. But it comes off 3 years where for most households, prices have gone up by about a fifth. And also the amount that, if you look at just what's spent on energy, food and housing, that proportion has gone up by about a third over the last 3 years. And of course, if you're a low-income household, you're spending more on those goods and services. So the inflation rate that you have experienced will be higher. But I think what we need to see from all parties as we go into this election is that we really have that focus on a plan to drive sustainable growth, on how we get investment going in our economy so that we see inflation staying low and growth staying high. So we see the increase in living standards, I think, that we all want to feel.
As you say, the poorest households hit hardest by high rates of inflation. Jeff, are people going to see the benefit of this drop in the rate of inflation?
I think people will judge it based on at what point do I feel I have the spending power that I did before it started. And unfortunately, I don't think any Western governments can deliver that in the short term. But we shouldn't, avoid the fact that it is good news. Rishi there was almost in tears of gratitude that he could finally qualify something, positive had happened. I guess what we'll see shortly from these guys is the sort of choreographed pantomime of whether or not you give credit or blame. It feels like you either give both or neither. But from the Conservatives' point of view, it's better that it's happening. Labour might not admit it, but they'd rather be coming into office potentially with inflation at 2% than say 2.7. But I don't think it is the game changer for this campaign that they need, and I'm not sure that actually exists. Right.
Well, we'll discuss that in just a moment in terms of whether it's going to change the polls in any way. But the inflation rate has dropped. It's got to 2%. But that is just the regular increase in prices falling. The cost of food is still 25% higher than it was at the start of 2022. And that is not going down, Damien. You have responsibility for that, then.
Look, it definitely is good news, as you say, that inflation has come down to target. It is a further sign, a further marker of progress. It's a plan. It's a plan that's working. There is still volatility in some.
May go back up.
Fuel's another one. So that's why we need to stick with the plan, and we need to make sure, as Rain said, actually ultimately it is all about having sustainable growth, because that is what That's what funds our public services. That's what enables living standards to rise. But this news today that inflation is down to 2% is very good news, and it is a sign that this plan is working.
Well, you say the plan is working, and we can see pictures here of the Labour leader Keir Starmer and the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves at a supermarket, obviously looking at the prices of goods in the supermarket in Wiltshire. You say the plan is working under the Conservatives. The cumulative inflation rate based on CPI, Consumer Prices Index, has been 24.2% since 2019. And there have been 14 consecutive rises in interest rates by the Bank of England. People's purchasing power, which is what Jeff was talking about, household purchasing power is lower. People's savings are worth less and their mortgages cost more. We've become poorer under the Conservatives. Living standards will be lower at the end of this Parliament. They are lower at the end of this Parliament than they were at the start. Was that your plan?
Look, we need interest rates to come down further, and they will. I mean, when you have good news like this on inflation, that is part of a line that then should lead in time to lower interest rates as well. You're right that the price level has gone up. Yeah. Disinflation, that is the rate of inflation coming down, is always a good thing. Well, Brain may give a view on this. Deflation is not necessarily something that you want to pursue, and we have seen wages having risen faster than prices.
Yes.
But I'm absolutely not denying that, of course.
But you accept we've become poorer. We've become poorer under Conservative government.
These have been difficult times. These have been difficult times for families. We know what some of the reasons for that are, and we can't ignore the fact. And I know sometimes it sounds like they always reach for this point, but it is true that we have had COVID and we have had Putin's invasion of Ukraine, with all the effects that had, not just on petrol prices, but on grain prices, all sorts of commodities, disrupting international trade. But this plan is working, it is delivering, and we need to stick with it.
Right. Is the plan working in the way it's just been described, Rain?
I think what business leaders I speak to really want to see is that plan for sustainable growth in our economy, and that really is about how we invest in our young people, how we invest in skills, how we get business investment going in our economy. That is what will ultimately drive the growth, which helps to give us tax revenues and fund our public services. And I think what businesses talk to me about is they want whoever is in charge to stick with some of the major decisions that help to attract investment from around the world. So whether that's investing in large infrastructure projects like HS2 that really give confidence that we can invest for the long term, whether it's thinking about how we transition the North Sea to a low carbon economy. It's really about sticking to some of these long-term decisions and ensuring that we are building the homes we need to see in our economy. We know we need to be building 300,000 homes per year. That helps to ease some of the pressure on housing costs, which has been one of the areas that has put pressure on households.
Absolutely. When it comes to Labour, no doubt you welcome the rate of inflation is now back at the Bank of England target. Are you going to put more pressure on supermarkets, for example? We've just seen Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in one to reduce prices if you're in government.
Well, firstly, yes, it's welcome that for the first time in 3 years, inflation has come within the 2% target. But the question at this election is about the Tory record. This is going to be the first Parliament in history where living standards are lower at the end than the beginning. And over the 14 Conservative years, and I'm going around the country, as you'd expect, I'm sure Damien is as well. And when you're on doorsteps, and you have the question, do you feel better off after 14 years of Conservatives? The resounding answer is no. Are public services in a better condition after 14 years? The resounding answer is no. And that is the reality of the Conservative record and the choice of this election.
There's something that Damien said a minute ago about interest rates coming down. There is noise coming out that might not even happen at the next meeting.
No.
And I do think that we talk about governments and incoming governments potentially. But the Bank of England really do sometimes get off lightly with this. They were slow to raise interest rates, which caused problems, and they had to go up in a sort of vertical way. And for me, they've been slow to bring them down as well, you know. And maybe at this point they worry that to cut interest rates now might seem like a political gesture, but I think it's what the wider economy... I mean, look, I should also, full disclosure, I just got a thing telling me my rate is coming to an end in 3 months, so I have got...
So you've got a vested interest, as many people have. Can I just show you this in BBC News? One person who certainly has given up, it seems, on Conservatives. Major Tory donor tells BBC he is voting Labour. Yes, John Caldwell, the billionaire founder of Phones for You, who gave £500,000 to the Tories before the last election, says he is going to vote Labour for the first time. He described the Prime Minister, Damien, as an absolute dud. He said, and you heard in the headlines, that Rishi Sunak showed a complete lack of judgment over D-Day, and he did so as Chancellor too. That's a pretty devastating verdict on the Prime Minister.
Well, I think Mr Caldwell, as a billionaire, is one of the few people in the country who can afford Labour's taxes. I did have to say, I did find it, and I speak as a great supporter of public service broadcasting, I did find it extraordinary that the BBC chose to make the voting intention of one very rich man the lead story on the news last night.
Would you have felt the same if he was voting Conservative?
Yes, actually, I just don't think it's desperately relevant.
I'm not sure
to the wider debate. You know, I'm knocking on doors, talking to lots of people in lots of different circumstances. I'm holding public meetings, having that debate. I'm not paying undue attention to one billionaire.
I'm not sure he came out of it that well, to be honest, because when he was questioned, quite obviously, like you supported Liz Truss not that long ago, and now you support Keir Starmer. It was almost like Keir Starmer's problems defending his support of Corbyn to the kind of word salad he often delivers now. What he's saying is that he thinks that Labour is all about growth. Now, there's two ways that they could achieve that principally, is tax cuts or more borrowing. I've got a hunch that it might be the latter, but it does seem odd. I mean, he seems quite sincere, but when he's sort of talking about D-Day, you'd think somebody that would only come at it from hard economics. And maybe it's just about being close to power when power is won, and they might think that there might be business rate changes, there might be council tax rises, and they want to influence that.
I mean, is there a price in terms of getting their support? Will pressure be brought to bear? There'll be people in the Labour Party who will be thinking you should be taxing or proposing to tax billionaires like Jim Ratcliffe, another billionaire who's withdrawing support from the Conservatives, and John Caldwell a lot more.
No, I mean, look, let me just take 2 points there. Firstly, I think you make the point about inward investment. I used to be the Shadow International Trade Secretary, and I think one of the things I was disturbed about going around the world was the impression other countries had about the political instability here. And I think we have to have an environment that attracts a great deal of inward investment. We would like to hold an investment summit in the first 100 days of a Labour government if we're privileged enough to form one. But on John Caldwell particularly, I mean, Damien says about not paying attention. There was plenty of attention paid to it in 2019 when he made a donation to the Conservative Party. So I do think there is a significance in someone, you know, an entrepreneur, founded, of course, Phones for You, billionaire, who has said what he has about voting Labour for the very first time. And it's a reflection as well. He may be one person, but I am coming across people on the doorstep who are lifelong Conservative voters, exactly like John Caldwell, who are now for the first time thinking of voting Labour.
Rain, very briefly, you wanted to say something?
What I would say is, regardless of who wins on the 4th of July and whoever is in number 10, I think we need them to be listening to business, because we know the vast majority of investment we need in our economy has to come from business and business leaders. So they need to be listening to businesses of all sizes to really understand what they need to see to help unlock the investment in our economy.
Well, you'll be happy to know we're going to hear from a small business person in just a moment, but let me give you these deadlines for postal and proxy votes appearing on your screen, because you've got until 5 p.m. today to apply for a postal vote. You have until 5 p.m. next Wednesday to apply for a proxy vote, but only on the basis that you have already registered to vote. So make sure you do those things by 5 p.m. today and 5 p.m. next Wednesday. As I said, we're going to talk to a small business owner. More than 5 million small businesses registered in the UK, an important factor then in deciding our next government. So let's find out what they want. Linda Anderson runs The Kitchen, Croxley in Hertfordshire. It's a micro business, a business with under 10 employees, which started as a cake business but now runs as a cafe offering food too. Welcome to you, Linda. How tough has it been running your business over the last few years?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I just feel like I really want to speak out on behalf of the very many micro businesses, perhaps in particular hospitality businesses that are really, really struggling at the moment. Many cafes, pubs, restaurants known to me and throughout the country have actually gone under recently because of the huge challenges that we are facing. We came out of the pandemic where we'd had to really diversify and pivot and change and, you know, work hard to keep our businesses afloat during that time. And now we're in a situation where just like it's like a perfect storm or an imperfect storm of challenges have arisen, which are making it really, really difficult for us. So over the last 18 months or so, we've introduced a lot of new things, outside catering, and we've really built up on our afternoon tea business, and we've changed it, some of our opening hours, we're all doing more breakfast, whatever. We have massively increased our turnover, like to the extent that we should be really, really proud of that.
Yes.
But whereas 18 months ago, we were actually showing a profit, we are now barely breaking even.
Why? Why is that?
Well, we've got no control over our utility bills. A £5,000 a year utility bill is now in excess of £20,000. We have no control over inflation. Only yesterday I heard that 10 kilograms of dark chocolate, which makes our infamous salted caramel brownies, will now be costing me £115, whereas 18 months ago that was £57.
Linda, can I just then say, what would be your number one priority that you would like to hear? We have Labour and Conservative politicians here in the studio.
Well, most of all, the issue for us is the VAT. The VAT legislation, I think, is really, really discriminatory. When somebody sits in our tea room and enjoys coffee, cake, afternoon tea, whatever, 20% is added in VAT to their bill. It's the same if someone takes away hot food. You can take away a cold sandwich, but if you take away a panini, 20% is added to the bill. The idea is that we're a conduit for VAT and we reclaim it on our purchases, but we can't because we purchase raw ingredients, which are 0 rated.
All right.
So every quarter we receive a large bill from HMRC for VAT, and this is just so discriminatory. I mean, in other countries it's so much lower.
Well, Linda, let me throw it open for discussion. Damien, listening to that, massively increased her turnover, and yet, of course, they're not able to make profits because of increased costs. What do you say? What are you saying?
I'm sorry. First of all, I'm sorry to hear that, and I do understand this has been a very difficult time for the hospitality business, for some food businesses. COVID was desperately difficult for hospitality. I used to work it was my own career before I was in politics, was in hospitality and the licensed trade, and I know a lot of people who work in that industry. The sector has done an amazing job in coming back from COVID, and it sounds like you've grown your business, Linda, incredibly effectively. What you say about rising costs, I totally understand, and that's why we need to not just get inflation under control, but as is happening now, but keep it under control and make sure we make things more manageable.
What help are you giving? But first of all, what help are you giving?
Yeah, you asked directly about that. I don't think you're going to hear a difference. Nick may correct me, but I don't think you're going to hear a difference between us.
That's not a good thing, though, is it, Damien? Well, I'm self-employed myself, and this so-called emergency rate has been around for so many years. And when I charge a client for a corporate event or a booking, I have to add a fifth. A fifth is an aggressive figure to a lot of people, especially in hospitality at a level like that. And the fact that it's not even a discussion to cut it for small businesses from a Conservative party, I find that disappointing.
Well, there are a number of things we do want to do to help small businesses, including, we have extended the retail and hospitality rate relief for another year. Over time, we really need to look at this imbalance that you can get between online sales and shops, and that I think structurally is a big issue. It's not so much for like the licensed trade, pubs and bars and cafes, but it is for the if there's a manufactured side of baked side of your business for sale. By, for example, changing that balance between warehouse business rates and retail premises business.
But for now,
these are really important.
They may be in the longer term, but we're listening to Linda talking about the situation now. What help is Labour going to give, promising to give small businesses?
So, Linda, first of all, thank you for coming on and saying the difficulties that you've had. And it must be extraordinarily frustrating to have increased your turnover in that way over 18 months, which I no doubt has taken a great deal of hard work. But actually to have your profit margin eroded by those rising energy bills. Now, just to pick a few things that I think that Labour would do if we are privileged enough to form a government. Firstly, we do need to bring energy bills down. That's why we would invest in a publicly owned energy company, GB Energy. It would be based in Scotland, and the idea would be to give energy security to the UK and to bring bills down annually by hundreds of pounds. Secondly, I don't know if late payments were a particular issue for your business, but I think that's something we also need to crack down on. I think cash flow is so important to businesses. And I've had small businesses tell me about difficulties that they've had with payments. We need to make that change. I also think we need to look at reform of business rates. So picking up something that Damien said, I do think now there is that imbalance between the online retailers and indeed bricks and mortar businesses. I don't think the business rate regime we have reflects it. And I think we need to, if we are privileged enough to form a government, have voices from small businesses and others into how best we can make those changes.
I just want to get a response from Linda from what you've heard from the two politicians. Does any of that make up your mind as to how you might vote?
Sadly not.
Right.
I've read as much of the manifestos as I can and listened to as much as I've been able, although I'm working 24/7 just to keep the business afloat. There's lot's been said about business rates, but the government, or government in waiting, really needs to listen to micro businesses. We're on a parade of shops in the high street, not in a high street, on a small parade with a very low rateable value. Business rates really aren't like a massive priority for us. It's the same when we hear that corporation tax is going to be reduced. It makes no difference. If you're not making a profit, you're not paying it.
Right.
What we need is action on VAT.
All right, well, we've heard that. Well, they've heard
listen.
that, hopefully, loud and clear. Rain.
So, Linda, you've done an amazing job in driving forward your business and adapting and being so resilient. So well done on that. And having worked closely with businesses through COVID and beyond, I think it's amazing how you've managed to adapt. I think what you need is a really strong growing economy and strong high street. So you're seeing people come to your cafes and so I can see, and obviously business rates, which does come out of businesses' turnover before they've made a profit, is probably less of an issue for you directly, but may have an impact on some of the businesses surrounding you and their ability. So I think having a reform of business rates will be really important. And I think more broadly, it's about how we make it easier for businesses themselves to invest and do some of the innovation that you have been driving, because businesses like you are really the heart of our economy.
But there isn't much, it sounds, directly going to small businesses like Linda's at the moment.
That's the point. I'm sure Linda's enjoyed all the compliments and support we've said, but what she said several times is that she wants a VAT cut. And from either side here, you're not getting any sign of that. And when you talk about Great British Energy, it may or may not be a good plan. But what's the time frame for that helping? A cut in VAT for small businesses would make a difference from day one, and neither of the main parties are considering it.
I mean, there may be businesses that have to go bankrupt, have to go close as a result if things don't change, if the profits are reduced so much. Just holding on year, unless you do something about VAT. Why aren't you doing it?
Well, look, first, I think it's important to say you have to be straight with people, and you have to say where there is scope for tax cuts and where there isn't. And as this is one thing, there's plenty more I'd love to discuss with Nick about tax, where there are big differences between us. This is one where we're not, making out
fair enough
that we might do something we don't. But Rain is absolutely right. The fundamental thing is the economy. If the economy is growing, that is good for everybody and for revenues of the business. And secondarily, having busy high streets and parades of shops, busy places where shops are, that is really, really important for all of those
But even growth, which you're putting at the heart and centre. I mean, every party wants to grow the economy. I was just going to say, every party wants to grow the.
It's not a new concept.
No, it isn't a new concept, but delivering it has been.
And we've had the third highest growth, the G7.
All right, let Nick just
200,000 more employers in the country than there were in 2010, and the unemployment rate has come down by almost half.
If you'd grown the economy at the same rate as the last Labour government, you'd have tens of billions of pounds more to spend. Can I just say this one thing?
Briefly.
It's VAT that we're being pushed on. But look, it is about being open and honest about the scale of the inheritance, and I'm not going to point to a VAT cut unless I can.
It's also about priorities and choices, of course, isn't it, Nick?
Well, all politics is.
But what about VAT cut for small businesses? Because the point about this, you both talk about growing the economy. These are medium to long-term things. Short-term businesses can disappear overnight. So why couldn't it be cut for small businesses? That's the question I'm asking.
Well, for the reason that we have to point to, whenever we want to spend money, we point to where it is coming from. And I wish, this falls into that example. I've heard very powerfully what Linda has said. But I'm not going to just say yes to things without being able to fund them. That's absolutely critical. It's unfunded promises that have got us into trouble.
Linda Anderson, thank you very much for joining us and good luck with your business ongoing. Now, the SNP have launched their manifesto today in Edinburgh. The First Minister, John Swinney, did the introduction. Let's listen to part of what he had to say.
We will join with progressive politicians south of the border to press for greater funding for the NHS and for the UK Government to match the pay deals that we've given our health staff in Scotland. That would see an extra £1.6 billion for the National Health Service in Scotland. And we would introduce a Keep the NHS in Public Hands bill at Westminster, a legal guarantee for a publicly owned, publicly operated health service. The SNP message on the health service is clear. It is simple and it will never change. The NHS is not for sale.
That was John Swinney. We can talk to Stephen Flynn, who is the leader of the SNP at Westminster. Hello to you, Stephen. Who is trying to sell the NHS?
Hi, Joe. How are you doing? It's been a wee while. Of course, those comments relate directly to comments made by Wes Streeting, Labour's incoming likely health secretary.
Oh yeah, which comments are those? Where does he say he's wanting to privatise the NHS?
If you allow me the opportunity to finish, he was very clear about the fact that he wants to invite the private sector into the NHS, but to even go beyond just hospitals as well. That's not good enough. We can't allow that to happen. But beyond stopping privatisation, what we need to see is investment in our health service, because it is being starved of investment by the Tories. We've got £18 billion worth of public sector cuts that have been baked in by the Tories, which the Labour Party are going to accept. We reject that. We think there needs to be more money going into our health service to meet the needs of the people of Scotland and indeed people right across these aisles. That's a positive vision in stark contrast to the status quo cuts consensus that's coming from the two major Westminster parties.
Let's talk about investment in just a moment. I want to focus on this idea that you are introducing a bill. You want Westminster to legally enshrine the idea of the NHS in public hands. Which of the main parties are pledging to privatise the NHS, Stephen Flynn? Privatisation means that they are going to start charging people for access to the National Health Service. Which party's doing that?
It also means making sure that we do not have a situation where we are inviting the private sector to operate the health service.
No, they're two different things. Private outsourcing.
Now, that is quite clearly what
Stephen, they are two different
I'm sorry,
things.
the two are very much interlinked. The two are very much interlinked, because if you get to a point where you overly invite the private sector and you lose that public status that it has, and what Wes Streeting has sought to do through his own comments is to invite the private sector in and to go beyond just hospitals themselves. Now, we know the bizarre plans of Nigel Farage, who'd be quite happy to get rid of the NHS. We know that the NHS is never safe in the Conservative Party's hands.
I'm talking about the Conservatives, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats.
But Joe, of course, if the Labour Party agree that the NHS should be kept in public hands, if it shouldn't be outsourced or people shouldn't be charged for accessing the NHS, then all they've got to do is back our bill. And it strikes me as quite concerning that the Labour Party response to this has been anger rather than simply saying we agree, we think the NHS should remain in public hands. And I would suggest that that's because of the comments of Wes Streeting and the fact that the Labour Party are accepting these £18 billion worth of public sector cuts.
As I say, we'll come to the cuts in just a moment, as you have outlined there. But Nick Thomas-Symonds is here in the studio. Do you want to actually outline what Labour is proposing? There is concern about increasing private sector involvement. There's been private sector involvement for some time, since Tony Blair's time. But are you on a slippery slope to allowing so much private sector involvement in the NHS that it will change the nature of the health service?
No, and there have been private beds in the NHS since it was created by Aneurin Bevan in 1948. I mean, this argument that somehow Labour wants to privatise the NHS, Wes Streeting has said over his dead body. Absolutely not. What we have said, and I think we should absolutely do, is of course we will use spare private sector capacity to bring down waiting lists. And I couldn't look my the people that I'm standing before for election in the eye and say, if there is an empty bed in a nearby private hospital that could be used to bring the waiting list down, why on earth wouldn't you do that? That is entirely sensible, but it's also entirely consistent with the founding principles of the NHS.
Stephen?
Well, if Nick is of that view and he's so confident of that view, what he can do today is state that his party would back our bill to keep the NHS in public hands. And what he could do beyond that is say that he will not back the £18 billion worth of public sector cuts that the Labour Party are accepting from the Tories, which the IFS call a conspiracy of silence, because that's going to have a detrimental impact upon our health service and our ability to meet the needs of individuals. Those are the easy propositions which he could agree to right now.
Nick?
I don't need to back an SNP bill to show my commitment to the NHS, not at all. And in respect of the second point that Stephen is making, there will be an immediate cash injection into the National Health Service if we get a Labour government at Westminster. We will fund it by closing the loopholes in the Conservatives' non-DOMS policy. The people who live here should pay their taxes here. And secondly, by closing the gap with people who are not paying their taxes. Now, in England, that will pay for an additional 40,000 appointments a week. And as Stephen knows, there will be Barnett consequences of that going to Scotland. I'm sure he will welcome, on the basis of what he's just said, that additional investment to Scotland if we are going to be able to secure that Labour government. But I would urge people in Scotland to vote Scottish Labour for change. We've had 17 years of Stephen's party in power in Scotland, 14 years of the Conservatives. If you want to send a government to Westminster from Scotland, vote Scottish Labour.
Right. I mean, in terms of the way you, the SNP, run health services in Scotland, because it is devolved to Scotland, you're asking for more money and more investment when your record, according to your critics, is lamentable. Here is the BBC News headline: NHS Scotland waiting lists hit record high. Why do you deserve more money from Westminster when you are mismanaging health services and have done so in your record in government already?
Sorry, Joe, I would reject that assertion wholeheartedly.
Which, what, the waiting list hit record high?
Taxation in Scotland, which is hold on a second, which has raised an additional £1.5 billion, has put record investment into our health service. We have extreme challenges in our health service, but they have the best performing A&Es anywhere on these isles. We haven't had a single day, one single day of junior doctor strikes in Scotland, in stark contrast to what's been the case elsewhere in these isles. We've not had a single day of nurses strikes, a single day of paramedic strikes, in stark contrast to what's been elsewhere. We are seeking to invest and protect our NHS so that we can deal with the challenges that have resulted as a result of austerity from the UK government, austerity which the Labour Party will continue with these £18 billion of cuts, and of course as a result of Brexit, which has dramatically impacted our workforce, particularly in our care sector, which means that we have a backlog where we can't get people into the care sector. Decisions taken in London which have directly impacted Scotland's health service. We are doing everything we possibly can to protect it, but we need more, which is why we reject the austerity agenda which the Labour Party accepts from the Conservatives.
But Stephen, if you've been doing such a good job in terms of running the health service in Scotland, why is it that the number of people in Scotland paying to go private because they are fed up of sitting on what long waiting lists has gone up from 19,000 in 2022 to 21,000 in 2023?
For the exact same reasons that there are backlogs in Wales and in England because of the pandemic. We know that that is the case, and what we need to see in order to counter that, in order to change that, is investment, which is why today we're saying that we want another £16 billion of NHS spending from the UK government, so that's £1.6 billion more coming to Scotland so that we can do more in order to bring those waiting lists down. But when it comes to our NHS, as I said, we've had a record funding, we have challenges, but we still have the best performing health service in pretty much every metric on these isles, and that's
not every metric, clearly, because I've just read you the waiting list.
Of course, as is the case I said almost every metric,
right.
as is the case in Wales, where the NHS is on its knees under Labour's control.
Right,
There's a stark difference, and it wasn't me, by the way. If we want to talk about West Streeting, as we did earlier, West Streeting said that all roads lead back to Westminster when it comes to the NHS in Wales. Why is it different in Scotland? I'm
All
sure
right,
Nick
well, let's
can
put that to
clarify
Damien. I mean, there has been a period of austerity, says Stephen Flynn. They need more money to invest in the health services that they run.
So look, all roads don't lead back to Westminster, as Stephen well knows. I mean, listening to the bit of Mr Swinney earlier that we were able to, and he was saying that, you know, a vote for the SNP would trigger another independence referendum. I wonder what for the SNP doesn't trigger another independence referendum. But with the powers that they already have, which are very substantial, running health, running education, I'd love to talk about that, by the way, if we have time, then they seem to dodge what the outcomes of those things are. You also, Stephen, have substantial tax-raising powers. If you want to, if you want more money to go into the exchequer, then you have the ability to do that. So stop looking to everybody else for what's wrong and start fixing your own house with the very, very substantial powers, including revenue-raising powers, that you have.
Stephen?
So we have raised £1.5 billion, as I said earlier, to go into our public sector. But I'm a little bit astonished.
So that proves it's possible to raise revenue.
We've had 14 years of austerity. We've had, well, as we have just did, and if the UK government replicated that, then we would have an additional £15 billion into the UK Treasury, which would allow us to spend more money on the health service, which would be able to resolve some of the issues which your party has caused. But the reality is we've had 14 years of austerity, but we've also had Brexit. And Brexit has taken £40 billion out of the Treasury. £40 billion worth of tax receipts out of the Treasury. The consequence of that is huge, and those decisions have been taken at Westminster and imposed upon the people of Scotland. We reject that. We believe we should be rejoining the single market, in stark contrast to the same language from the Labour Party and the Tory Party that Brexit has to be accepted. It doesn't have to be accepted. There is a better future on offer. There is a more hopeful future on offer, but that only happens if people vote for the Scottish National Party.
Stephen, just before I let you go, taking a breath from politics, will you be watching the football tonight?
I will be watching the football tonight. I hope you will be too.
I will be. Absolutely, I will be. Against Switzerland, isn't it? I don't know what time it is. You'll have to tell me. But I think it... What time is it, Stephen? Do you know?
It's 8 o'clock tonight. Yeah.
8 o'clock
It's
tonight.
8 o'clock tonight. I'm a big member of the Tartan Army. I got a notification this morning telling me that my flight was due for my travels out there. But of course, I'm here instead because this is much more important. But I've got absolute confidence Steve Clark and the boys will win tonight.
It's good to know. We can see some of your fans gathering there for that match later on. Thanks very much there, Stephen Flynn. Now, it is only a few weeks to go until polling day. And earlier, the BBC reporter Jim Connolly gave us the view from some voters from a cattle market in Selby in North Yorkshire. Let's have a look and a listen.
Joe, welcome along to Selby. We're at a cattle market. It's very noisy, as you can probably hear in the background. The auction is happening right over there as we speak. We've come here today because we want to talk about rural issues and give you a flavour of different parts of the country and what they're saying. To give you an idea about Selby, it was described to me this morning as blue, 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 but that did change recently at a recent by-election when Labour had a very big win. So all eyes will be on areas like this when it comes to the election day. We've been looked after brilliantly this morning by Val. Val, tell us about this place.
Yeah, hi there, Jim. Well, as you can hear, the cattle auction is taking place today.
Very noisy it is.
It is noisy, and early this morning we were selling the pigs and the sheep, and everything here today goes to the abattoir.
There's a tea room over there where you've been supplying us with loads and loads of tea. Is the election the talk of the tea room?
No, it isn't.
So I've picked a terrible place to come down. Right, OK. Is there anyone that will speak to me?
Yes, there is. I'll introduce you to one of our lady
Brilliant.
farmers.
Amazing. Right, let's head down. Rebecca, tell me, Rebecca, when it comes to the election, do you think politicians are listening to rural communities and farming communities?
No, I don't. I think they need a better understanding of definitely the farming community, especially for the younger generations to keep carrying on with farming. It's a hard way of life for little reward often, so I think we need more financial input, definitely, to encourage those younger people to carry on.
So what will you be looking for from the politicians? Because I understand you're not that sure who you're going to vote for.
No, I'm not at this moment in time. I think as well as encouraging younger people into farming, I think we need to be encouraged as a country to produce our own food, i.e. corn and meat.
Rebecca, thanks ever so much for chatting to us. Hello there. Tell us, farming, is it a priority for politicians?
Definitely, without element of doubt. Yeah, they're going down wrong tracks. They won't listen to us. We're taking good land out of production, what should be growing corn and etc. And they just don't listen to us.
So do you know which way you're going to vote?
Not at the moment, no.
What do you want from the politicians? What will you be looking for before you go and put your vote in?
Well, to put more money into it and encourage younger generations and, so forth to carry on, because it's a diminishing industry.
But we all rely on it. That's the difference, isn't it? That's the thing. We all rely on farming. We rely on the food.
But we can't get it through to politicians. This is the trouble. On the odd ones. So they're not. Yeah, that's the problem.
Do you feel the same?
Yeah, we're only producing probably just over 50% of his food at the moment. There's no food security policy really on the agenda. Where we're going to get that food from with increased population, and there's many hundreds of thousands of acres of agricultural prime land going to be taken out of production with the solar projects, which should have nothing against solar, but it should be on poorer quality land, and same with turbines. But where are we going to get the food from? There's no idea at all where it's going to come from. We could be down to a third. Are we going to get it from Australia or the Amazon rainforest? What's the idea?
I keep hearing from all of you that you don't feel connected to politicians.
No.
It does feel a million miles away from Westminster here.
Yeah.
If you were going to start your own political party or campaign for a political party, what would you say the best policy to win farmers over would be?
We've got, since we've had Brexit and such like that, we're on reduced income as such. We're not on a level playing field with Europe as such straight away. We're not getting that money. And so more has to be invested. One of my main projects is more should be done on the rivers. We've suffered the worst flooding in this area for my generation, with thousands of acres not cropped at the moment, and it's not our fault, it's climate change, isn't it?
Well, that is the view down here at the auction. It's not the view of everyone in Selby, obviously, but it is a good reflection of a few voices. But we will be in different places over the next couple of weeks. Tomorrow, for example, we're in Sheffield. And if you're interested in who's standing here in Selby, well, there's a full list on the BBC News website.
Well, that was Jim there in Selby. Let me just show you the list of candidates who are standing there in the election. You can see it. We only have a few minutes left. But, Jeff, listening to the cattle market people, the people who work there, not the talk of the tea room,
yes,
the lady said at the beginning.
The most telling moment of the whole report. Is it the talk of the tea room? She curtly said no. And it isn't on a national level. I've got to say that they could have done us all a favour and ended this election 2 days before the Euros started. Because at that point, I think we'd have all been grateful, or suspended it for the duration of the tournament. And that is a problem. I think genuinely, there's more sport to come as well. Is for both of these guys, is getting messages through while we're fundamentally distracted.
Ray, were you surprised by what you heard there? Not feeling connected to Westminster, still undecided. And we're only a few weeks from polling day.
No, I mean, I think just hearing some of those voices and both different generations of farmers, I have to say, in this job, one of the great privileges is being able to speak on behalf of farmers through the National Farmers Union, and also being able to see some of the pressures our farming community is experiencing from, food and drink manufacturers who have also seen some of the pressures that farmers...
And what do they want?
Well,
the same things?
I think if you think about it, and we heard some of those stories, that farmers are at the forefront of the impact of climate change. So flooding has had a huge impact on food production this year. And I think if we're thinking about, we need a proper land management strategy. We need to be working with our farming community to say how and where are we going to invest in solar panels, which we do need as part of our energy transition. But we need to put them on the sites where we're working with our local farming community.
Oh, are you hearing enough from the politicians just generally about the farming community?
I think we would like to hear more, and some of the, but in many ways, some of the issues the farming community are facing, many other businesses face. So if they want to look at their energy costs and think about how they can make more investment in renewable energy. Some of the challenges is the grid connections, the planning permission to try and make their buildings and their farms more energy efficient. They can't get some of that.
All right.
So I think it's about a proper planning strategy.
It's all we have time for. Thank you to all of my guests from all of us here. Bye-bye. I'll be back tomorrow.
He's enjoyed the best money can buy.
My conscience at this point was telling me, go and spend, spend, spend.